Hello everyone, this is Bradley. I will make two tutorials talking about some presets that I think useful in working with splines. Today I'm going to make a simple one. Please be aware of that I once proposed to integrate a similar idea into the master, but it has been rejected by the developers. So follow this tutorial to make the preset if you're interested in. Just notice that this preset is completely personal. It's neither official nor professional. Regardlessly, this preset will be used frequently in the future live noding or even tutorials. So let's start. So here is a very simple setup that I have a distributed matrices node to generate a lot of vectors for a circle. And these vectors are basically points. If I connect all these points, I form a spline and I output these splines for a curve object. Then I have a curve object, a circular curve object. The issue is you can see this is not really a circle, more like kind of polygons. It's kind of very jaggy. So to smooth it out, there are several methods. One way is just to increase the amount of vertices. But you can see if you're increasing too many amount of vertices, then it just hits a lot of polygons. And if you're working with a very complicated thing, then probably is not something perfect. There's actually a better way, which is called smooth bezier spline. What it does is actually I think the way it works is it actually controls the handle of all these points. And you can choose all this smoothness. And sometimes you can generate some interesting effect through all these kind of things. What I would like to say is these two nodes are basically always in kind of connection. I barely see a moment that you only need a spline from points without the smooth bezier spline. And if I'm hitting Control A and search for spline from points, and I need to hit Control A to smooth bezier spline every time if I'm working with a lot of spline, then it's kind of boring. And it takes time. It's even 1 second is still a time. So to me, it's a lot of time if you work with a lot of spline. As you see from my tutorial, many of them are about the spline. It's not only to generate objects, but also to generate some other things, like if you're full of the spline or you're instancing on the spline and so on. So I'm going to make a preset, which I call that the spline formation. The reason I call this simply because if you start with an F, then it's something comparable to spline from points. So I think that it's something easy to remember, but it does not really matter. The whole point is it's basically connect these 2 points together using a group node. But actually it's more than that, because the issue is that here you have a radius in this spline from points, but you can put that into a list and it will convert itself, but you cannot do this in preset. If you would like to know more about the preset, you can go to my preset basic tutorial, but the basic idea is you have to save in your startup files. So I have a library and you have to save that in a startup file. So anyway, today we're going to create this node, which I think is really useful. So let's take a group input. And we're going to use two nodes as I mentioned earlier, the spline from points and smooth bezier spline. And I'm going to take an output node to output our splines. In terms of the input, it's very easy just to put all these values back to the input so that it will inherit the name but also the default values. And I'm also going to put the radius and tilt. And as I mentioned earlier, the group input cannot distinguish the float and the float list. So if you type a float, you can only choose either float or float list, while the actual node by itself has the ability to convert it to between the float and the float list. So I also would like to make such a change, but how should I actually deal with this thing in this preset? There are a billion ways to solve that issues. I'm only going to present you the simplest way that I think. And all the principles converge to the usage of this switch node, where you can define whether it's a list or not a list. And by hitting this plus icon, I'm going to generate a float list. And let's name that as a radius list. Or you can actually call that a radii. I think it's a better way, but it does not really matter. If I put this radius list into this switch, then it will the other value must also be a switch, and the output will be a will be a list as well. If I put this output into the radius, it will convert itself to radii. So everything will be a list now. If I put this radius into the false value, because this is a single value, it has a solid color, and this is a list color, it will generate a create float list. So what happens is it's a list of a single value. I know this is probably tricky to understand, but this is how it works. So, and this is the way how to actually take a float list and a float at the same time in this kind of setup. So by doing so, and by changing this condition, I can define whether I use a single float value and a float list. So another question is how to actually change this condition. So obviously you can hit this plus again, take a boolean. This is one way to do that, but it's very bad for UI. If you're thinking about this tilt as well, so I already generate one additional socket for this switch, and for tilt I need to generate one more socket, and by the end of the day I think it's not efficient if you generate more sockets, particularly for such kind of switch. So I'm going to use another method. So if I call up a node and get a list length for this radius list, and if I hit W and it goes down to the viewer, you can see it outputs no, because the list length is no. If I generated this invoke input, you can see it tells the list length is 0 because I'm not inputting anything to this list yet. And now if I take a boolean input, and if I activate this boolean input, you can see what happens is it will return a false number. So what does it mean is the boolean works in a way that 0 means false and not 0. So non-zero, whether it's your positive value or negative value, it always returns a true value. This is the idea. So I can directly put this list into the condition to define, and what it happens is if you input anything to this radius list, then it will use this radius list instead of a radius, and this is the meaning of this setup. And you can basically do the same thing to the tilt, which I'm not going to show you, but it's basically the same thing. Just to remember, if you're using such a way, the list number should go to true instead of false, and so on. So let's just try this node very quickly. So if I put these vectors into place, spline to the points, and I take a cyclic. If I put the list into the radius list, you can see the entire shape becomes kind of very weird. If I change the type to stop, you can see this is how it works, because the radius is actually control the thickness and so on and so forth. And because the amount is not the same, so this list will also be repeated. But if you would like to make kind of uniform radius, like something like that, and you just put the vectors into the amount, it will also again get the list length and so on. So this is kind of beyond the scope of this discussion, but anyway. And you just do the same thing to the tilt, it will do the same thing. Here's another issue: is if you're doing these things, and if you put what if you don't want to smooth it out? Maybe you just want jagginess. Maybe jagginess is something you want, and what will happen if one thing to think is to put this smooth to 0, but it will actually not work sometimes. It's actually the way smoothness goes to 0 is not preferred at some moment. So if you take the cyclic away, you can see it's actually working very badly. It's basically about the principle of smoothness. I'm not an expert on this, so I cannot really explain why, but it's basically what it happens. So what should we do to solve this issue is I'm going to take another switch. According to the developer, there is a better way to solve this problem, but I still don't understand what does he mean actually. So I'm going to use my method. At least it works. So I think I'm going to put this smooth the spline into the false. I'm going to use this smoothness as a condition. As I said, if it's 0, then it will return false. Oh wait, if it's 0, it will return false, then I should put this smooth the spline to true. And then put the original spline into place. And I'm going to output this switched splines. So now you can see even if the smoothness is actually 0, it looks kind of normal. It's just a spline without jagginess, but you can definitely turn that to a smooth splines, and it works perfectly fine. I think this is basically done. You just need to add tilt using the same method as well. But this is basically it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll probably see you next time. Bye bye.